Okay, guys, good evening. We are going to get started. For those, I do see a couple new faces who joined us this week, so welcome. We get on here for 30 minutes. We discuss a couple topics that we've pre-prepared around the coaches, and then please ask any questions. If there's something that you've been meaning to ask your coach this week, these are the calls to address it, and others can learn from your questions, so we encourage that. The best way to ask questions is in the chat. So write your question, and if it pertains to a topic we're talking, try to write it at any time. We'll get to it. So tonight we're gonna start off with Coach Harold. He's just gonna talk about power. We often get questions about 3-second power versus 10 and normalized power versus average. So he's gonna take care of it. Let's go.
All right. So yesterday in our group bike ride, this topic came up, so we wanted to discuss it. On all of your computer units or your head units that you use for your bike, you'll have different options of how to see your power output during or after a ride, but during the ride specifically. And you can set up, most of the computers will have a preset where you can set it to either 3-second average, 10-second average, or 30-second average. Some of the other computers, the newer ones, will have other options. I've also actually seen a couple of the really fancy head units where you can customize a rolling amount of time for your average power that you're reading on your computer, okay? So basically, the way this is set up is your 3-second average is the most accurate or real time that you're looking at, because it's a rolling 3 seconds. Every 3 seconds, it's going to give you the average number of what you just did over the last 3 seconds. Okay. And then 10 seconds gets a little bit longer. So it gets a little bit less real time, a little bit less accurate of what you're pushing at that moment. And then the 30-second average is even longer than that. And what you're getting is basically just an average of what you just did over the last 30 seconds, which could have been pretty up and down. And it just gives you that average number over the 30 seconds. Okay. So why do we have those different settings and when do we use them? The reason we have those different settings is that depending on what course you're on, you may or may not want a longer or shorter average that you're looking at, okay? So if you're on a perfectly flat course, like let's say you're doing an Ironman Florida or an 70.3 Galveston in Texas or a course like that, then you want a longer average because you may not want to look at your power going up and down every 3 seconds, and it's only going up and down by a little bit. It should be mostly a steady output, so a longer average kind of gives you a more even number and it doesn't get inside your head so much of seeing that number go up and down. If you're riding on a course where you have more technical aspect to it, maybe there's some longer, more sustained climbs, and you want to see what your power is at that moment, then you would use a shorter average, like a 3-second average, because you don't want to get to the top of a climb that's, more than 30 seconds long and have been pushing, 300 or 400 watts and didn't see that number until it was too late. Does that make sense? Okay, so I would use a shorter average, rolling average on a more technical course where there's climbing or a lot of turns, or it's a more punchy style type race, because I want to see real time what I'm doing right now. And then on a flatter, more sustained, even output type of course, then I'll do a longer average because I don't need to see that number so specifically because it's not going up and down as much anyways, and I want to see a nice steady output. All right, so if you are somebody who seeing that number go up and down like that kind of gets inside your head a little bit, then I would consider that when I'm looking at what average time I want to use for what races I'm doing. Maybe something in the middle would be good for you, where you can get a little bit more real time of what you're doing, but it's not going to jump up and down so sporadically that it kind of gets in your head a little bit. And then if you're not on a perfectly flat course or sustained like power output type of course, then I would stay away from the longer 30-second average. Okay. Now, what is the difference between average power and normalized power? Because you can also put your normalized power up in one of those windows on your computer as well. And it usually just says NP. It's under one of your power metrics that you can use on your computer. And normalized power is basically, it's basically average power without the zeros. So it's a little bit more complicated than that. So just to keep it simple, normalized power is the average of the work that you've done. So it's more indicative of your effort, right? So average power can be a little bit less indicative of your effort because it includes the zeros in the average. Whereas normalized power takes the zeros out essentially, and then just gives you the average of the work that you've done. Okay, while you're putting effort into the pedals. Okay, so if you do a 5-hour ride and you've done quite a bit of coasting, then your average power is going to be lower and your normalized power is going to be higher. Okay, now we can also look at the specific difference between those two numbers, and that gives us another data point to look at. It's called variability index, or the variable index. It's labeled VI on Training Peaks. And by looking at that number, you can tell whether you're on a course where there was a lot of technical aspect to it, or a lot of coasting, or punchy hard efforts, or you were just going hard and then going easy, or what have you. Whereas on a steady, more sustained type effort, your average power and your normalized power are going to be closer to each other. Okay. So if you're in an Ironman, I always like to tell athletes to try to keep that variability index close to 1.05 or below, because you want a nice, steady, sustained effort through an Ironman. Whereas on your shorter races, you can be a little more punchy, you can burn a few more matches, you can race the race, be a little more aggressive, and that VI may be a little bit higher than that, and that is okay depending on where you are in your raceability and what you're trying to attack in the race. So if you see, when you're setting up your windows for what power number you want to look at while you're racing, just take all that into consideration, whether you want to look at 3-second average, 10-second average, 30-second average are the most popular. And then I always have my normalized power up there as well, because it's a little more indicative of the effort that you've been putting down throughout the entire effort. So it'll be a rolling average of what you've done through your entire bike ride, whether it's an hour long or 5 hours long. Okay. Does anybody do we have any questions about that?
Yeah, I think we got them answered on through the chat, so we're set there. I will I will speak to what I have on my computer. I always have normalized power, and then I personally always had 3 seconds power, because I did want to see that I was controlling my power going up a hill. I wasn't overcooking it, which most people do. And then I also wanted to make sure I was pushing enough power going down a hill where most people coast. And so that kept me honest. And then personally, what I like to do, and it was more a mental game, was my 5-mile lap. I had lap power always, and I made sure to lap it automatically every 5 miles. And in my head, I always gave myself goals for every 5-mile segment. So maybe starting out a race, I knew I wanted to back off and start a little easier. And so just say if I wanted to get to 200 watts, I'd start off at like 180 watts. And I'd say, okay, for these 5 miles, let's just stay here. And then when I go forwards in the race and I'm like, okay, now I have to hit 200, it wouldn't be taking, if I didn't have that normalized power lap, I would still have to now pull up the power from what I just did. So I just say, hey, that's in the past. And now I'm focusing on these 5 miles to hit ideally an average of 200 watts. And then also the reason I did it mentally is in my mind, I broke up the race by 5 miles at a time. And if I ever had like a moment where I just lost focus, to be honest, or kind of went off the rails and didn't hit my numbers, I could say that's in the past. And now it's a new lap and I look forward to it. And I'm like, okay, now I'm going to do this 5-mile lap better. And then I played a game with myself at the end of the Ironman. You typically see like yourself drop off. And so I kind of like made deals with myself as far as like, okay, we're 100 miles, 105, 110, like try not to let it drop off by more than X amount. Ideally, we should stay steady. Doesn't typically happen, but that helped me. So anything you want to add, Harold, before we move on?
No, I mean, that's perfect right there. I mean, I would stay away from only looking at normalized power. It's a great number to see. It gives you an idea of what you've done over the entire ride. But like Natasha said, if you want to have any idea of what you've done over the last 5 miles or the last 30 minutes, then you want something, an average power number in front of you, or a lap power number in front of you that can tell you what you are doing right now. Because normalized power, once you get halfway into a 100-mile bike ride, that number is not going to change very easily, right? So your real-time power is something that you want to look at in some capacity, whether it's an average or a lap.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'm going to completely go off topic a second, just because I talked about what I was looking on my bike, and I get this question all the time. What do you look at when you run? And because I'm pacing my race predominantly off heart rate, I always look at that. And then on that screen with that, I have my laps, so the 1 mile average. That's what I see on my main screen. And it just keeps me very present to say, hey, for this mile, ideally, I should be hitting this pace. And then I hit the next mile, and then it's taking the average of that mile. And I found that to be very effective. And I just kind of like chip away the 26 miles, focusing on that 1 mile at a time. But then I could always scroll over a screen and look at, okay, what is my average pace overall? What is my distance? What is my time overall? But that wouldn't be the main focus. If I felt like I had too many data points, it had my mind going all over the place and instead of staying super present in, okay, I've got heart rate I can control, and what is my average pace out of curiosity for this mile? So, okay, awesome. Okay, we're gonna move on. We have gonna cover a lot of things about the swim, so we're gonna leave that for last. We've been covering a lot on fueling, hydration, sodium, and sometimes we realize we kind of cross them, and so by mistake. And so Nick is going to talk about that for a second. If Nick, you just want to take the topic and run with it.
Sure. Yeah. So I think we spent so much time on sodium and carbs and sweat testing through Levelin to understand how much you have and understand, how many carbs you should take in per hour, that what I see a lot of athletes doing is they're having decoupling, meaning that they're getting to the end of runs and they're getting to the end of rides and their heart rate's going up, but their power is going down or their pace is going down. And usually that's an indication of dehydration or improper hydration throughout your activity. And so when I usually ask questions, what we find a lot of times is that someone says, well, I need to have 100 grams of carbs, so I put 100 grams in one bottle. I know I need to have 100 grams an hour, so I just have one bottle an hour, and that's my focus. And they don't take into aspect the hydration that goes with it. And so what I urge athletes to do is every couple of weeks, especially right now, we're in a time where it's still hot, and the next 6 to 8 weeks, we're going to start to have changing conditions, meaning that the amount of hydration you're going to need is going to continue to change. And so before your long run or before your long ride, weigh yourself naked, go do your workout, record how much fluids you consume, both carbs and just water, and then shower off, weigh yourself naked again, and then do the math and determine, did I hydrate or enough? You don't have to replace everything. I think Levelin's guideline, I think it's between 3 and 5% loss is acceptable before you start to impact performance. But if you, like we've talked about, I think Mike talked a lot a couple of weeks ago about concentrated bottles. So if you have a concentrated bottle, you're constantly mixing water with it to make sure you have the right osmolality and make sure that you have no stomach distress. But if you're doing a bottle that just has your hydration in it, then you're going to have to make a decision of, if I need 2 bottles an hour, there's one school of thought that says, well, I should put 50 grams in each bottle because I need 2 an hour, or you can have 100 grams in one and strictly water in the other. There's certainly personal preferences that come into play, but I guess my takeaway is, especially as we're during, still warmer conditions, make sure that you're not only nailing your carbs per hour and your sodium per hour, but also that you're getting total hydration that you need, and make sure by a weight check, which is real simple to do. You don't have to send anything anywhere. You can do it in your home, easy peasy, record it in your notes for your coach, and then you'll be able to get an understanding if you're taking in enough hydration.
Awesome. That's perfect. Yeah. And I do want to speak to something that I personally do, and I've gotten in trouble with, is I resort to what is on course as far as the fueling. So I'll start with what I want to fuel with, and then I actually go to Gatorade Endurance. And so that's already pre-mixed sodium, pre-mixed carbs, and realize if I'm needing, the conditions are hotter and I realize I need to drink more, carbs are coming along with that. Sodium is coming along with that if I'm taking more bottles. And people usually don't think about that. They're like, I'm going to drink more, but you got to realize now everything else has changed as well. And so typically when I find myself in that position, like if I have pre-planned, and this is what I did in racing, two bottles of Gatorade Endurance per hour and a gel. But if I felt like I needed to drink more because of how much I was sweating, and I took 2.5 bottles of Gatorade Endurance, well, I just X-nayed the gel. I didn't need it anymore because I was getting all those calories essentially from Gatorade Endurance strictly. So something to make sure that you guys are on top of if you're blending like all your needs in one bottle. Okay, guys. Any questions? I don't see any in the chat. So we're going to finally speak to the swimming. Okay, there's so many little things that I want to address here, and I'm just going to start with, and Coach Harold, Nick, all the other coaches on here, whenever you want to jump in on the topic, then just let me know. I'll give you a second. First of all, going to the swim, I feel like we get this wrong very many times. when we walk to the swim, we need to be walking in running shoes. Too many times I see flip-flops and at worst barefoot. And you have a course, most courses these days, you're walking a mile. And think about walking in your flip-flops for a mile before you're about to do an Ironman. Just the strain that's putting on your feet and your body. And so first things first is bring 2 pairs of shoes. It's so simple. I see it. People make that mistake all the time. And then you hand it off or putting in your special needs as you're about to start the race. Second thing is I see people putting on their wetsuit like 2 hours before the race and it's maybe hot out there. And I'm like, why are you standing sweating in your wetsuit? Like try to leave it until the very last minute. I can't tell you, last year at Waco, they had that afternoon start and people were in their wetsuits like an hour before and it was so hot. And they like literally dehydrated themselves before they even got in the water. And so you have to be very particular about your timing of when you're putting on your wetsuit and skin suit and how much time does it take me to put it on and then try to get it on at the very last minute, especially if it's warm. And it may be a case where you're putting it onto your waist and then you're waiting till the very last minute to like put it on, put your arms up, zip it up, and then just have someone around you to help pull it up. Okay. So very simple. You need to be there early. Okay. So what I do, and I don't want to be in my wetsuit, is I am typically one of the first people at the swim start because it starts to crowd up real quick. And if you want to be in a position where you're in the front of the corral, like Waco, they had this long chute that went all the way around. And to get in there and get to the front was a nightmare. And there's a good chance that you're just not going to get to the front if you wait too late. So if you're competitive, be there early, have the time to get in the front chute, and you don't even have to put your wetsuit in. I've seen people get in the chute and be standing where they want to be and then put their wetsuit on. Okay. And then totally aside from this, I always have water bottles with me. Like the worst thing is you get there, and this has happened, and the race is supposed to start at 7 a.m. and now it's 7:15, it's delayed, and you're standing in your wetsuit sweating and you've got nothing to sip on. Again, you're just dehydrating yourself. So it's all these little things that matter that will really start your day off in a good place. Now, swim starts. I'm going to just speak to positioning. Everyone around you likes to guess their ability to be better than what it is. So if you're an 1 hour, 10-minute swimmer, everyone who is a 1 hour, 10-minute swimmer starts in like the 1 hour group. Okay. It's just a fact. And so I'm like, if they're going to do it, if you're comfortable with it and you want to be in a comfortable position, you should be doing it as well. I don't know if Harold, you agree with me, but I say, yeah, be up there. The reason I also like everyone to be up there, you want to feel like you're in the race. Like you don't want to be like, hey, I'm only a 130 swimmer, but now all these other people that are actually also 130 swimmers are in the 115. And now you're all the way in the back. And now half the race is done and you're out there by yourself before you even get on the bike, out there in the swim by yourself. So if you know you're going to work through the field and maybe you are a weaker swimmer, get up there because you want to be in a position where there are other good cyclists and good athletes around you to kind of go through the course together. Even though you're not drafting, there's a difference when there's no one out there and you're trying to pass everyone and everyone is out there and you're kind of in the race. So yeah, if you don't know, ask your coach of where you should stand. And I think that is very vitally important. Swim starts, what I'm telling all athletes from now until race day is in practice, you have to mentally envision yourself starting. And what pace are you going to go out at? What is the effort? And that's going to differ for everyone based on their ability. Are you going to be someone who starts hard to go with a group and you get in a draft and now you can settle and you can cruise in? Or are you someone that's maybe a little more anxious, you don't do well starting hard at all, and then you fade the rest of the swim? You need to be someone who maybe just starts off super conservative and then builds throughout. And then you have to realize if you're someone who starts hard and fades badly in training, and you need to practice this to know, realize come race day, you're going to be so excited to get going. And through best intentions, your best intentions to start easy, typically it doesn't happen and you end up starting too hard. And then this whole fade happens. So you really have to have control of your start and have practiced it over and over again in practice. So understanding your pacing, understanding some form cues to keep you under control, but also how can you best hold your form together under fatigue is what I say. For my whole career, I had a coach say, cadence, cadence, cadence. And literally when I got tired, that was my thing. Get your cadence up, keep it going. And then I started doing these descent sets that we're doing. where I would play around with how can I get faster through the 1 through 4. And I would do cadence and I would see what my time is at the 80% effort. And then I would do like propulsion. I'd focus on long strokes, a lot of force on my hands. And I'm like, whoa, I'm 3 seconds faster and my effort is like 5% easier. So from then on out, when I got tired, I focused on being long and focused on holding a lot of water, pushing a lot of water back instead of cadence. And I wish I knew that my whole career. Okay.
Can I say one thing to that, Natasha? One thing that I do with that, I think that's like, I love that idea. Another thing is counting your strokes and trying to like, so from each descending like interval, drop 1 or 2 strokes too. And so like you're playing around with that cadence, and then you really are having to work on that propulsion. So that's one thing that's really helped with the same thing, like not over, like slowing my stride rate or my stroke rate. So anyway, that's it.
Perfect. Harold, thank you, Katie. Do you have any strategies for the start, Harold, that you think of or tell people to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm with you 100% on that. I got 2 different types of athlete. The one that's going to be aggressive, that we want to be up there in the race. And then the other athlete that's maybe a little anxious about open water, needs to stay calm and stay back just a little bit. And a lot of it just starts with where you're positioning yourself. Where you position yourself in the swim chute of the start. If you're in the race and you want to be racing and you're an aggressive racer, then you're thinking about where you want to be at the start of the bike, not what your pace is when you start the swim, right? So if you're racing people and you're typically a little bit of a slower swimmer, you don't want to start right at the place where you should start. You want to start a little bit ahead so that you can be in the race when you get to the bike, right? And you're an aggressive racer anyways, and nobody's going to be upset with you doing that. That's perfectly fine. It's a race, right? And then the other person is the person who's maybe a little less experienced. Open water, it creates a little bit of anxiety. We need this person to stay calm and stay relaxed. Get in the water where you feel comfortable. And if that means that you're a 130 swimmer in an Ironman and you want to start at 130 or 140 so you don't get thrashed by other swimmers around you, then that's perfectly fine. You're not aggressively racing the race anyways, and you want to be in a place where you feel safe and comfortable. Okay. So exactly what Natasha just said right there. And then a lot of it, I think, is just learning how to have that 10,000 foot view or that bird's eye view of what you're doing in the swim. Because when we're out there in the water, we really just have about a 2 foot periphery, right? We can see around us right here, and that's about it. But if you can kind of get a good first thing that I like to do when I get to a swim course of a race is find a position or somewhere where you can stand, like maybe there's a bridge over the water or there's a hill up at the top of where the lake is, where you can get a good view of the course and you're looking at those buoys and you're envisioning yourself going through the course. You're counting the number of buoys, you're looking at landmarks of bridges or big trees or big houses, something like that that kind of gives you a better sense of when you're in the race, you look up and you see that house and you recognize it from before the race when you saw it. So now you know where you are in the race, right? So these little cues of having kind of the ability to understand where you are in relation to other groups or other packs, where you are in the course, where the turn buoys are, how the course works, all that stuff is going to be advantageous as well.
Awesome. Perfect. One thing I'm going to talk about just as far as where to swim. You might be someone who wants to stay away from the crowd and you might swim to the side of where everyone is not swimming, right? Realize though, if you're someone who thinks they may hang on to a kayak at any point, if you're going to, have that kind of anxiety, they are in the inside lane of the buoys. And know that the turn buoys are the only buoys you actually need to go around. You can actually, even though they have the course and they say, hey, keep it all on your left, you can actually swim with it on your right. It's actually no big deal. But the problem is that's where the kayaks are. And so that's why they give the guidance to stay on that side. And so I would say if you're going straight, don't panic if you end up passing it on your left because of all the people around you. Don't worry about that, but just look out for the kayaks. And then if you feel like you will need to hang on to a kayak, that's where you should be swimming. If you just want your space, then you need to be swimming away from everyone else. And then obviously, if you're someone that's a good swimmer, and I see this all the time, you need to be in the group because you're going to be sucked down, okay, the river if you are with people. So you have to now get used to swimming with a whole bunch of people around you because it is going to benefit you. And I see this all the time, and I never want to see it again from anyone. If you have two people swimming together and you're swimming well, and you're going stroke for stroke, get behind them, please. I so often see someone swimming the whole way with someone and they're bumping shoulders, and I'm like, just get behind them, draft. It's going to feel like you're not doing anything, but you're going to get out of the water as if you did nothing. And now you're going to blow by everyone on the bike. You being next to them just makes no sense. Now, what I do, if you're behind someone and you're like, man, this is so easy. What I do is for a second, I go right next to them. And if I don't pull away from them, I just get back. And I'm like, you know what? And I'll tell you this, 90% of my races, I'm stuck in this pack and I literally feel like my effort for the swim is like a 5. And it's just because I missed the front pack that I ideally wanted to be with. And now I'm over here, but I can't pull away from them. So I'm going to stay there. And then sometimes they go a little bit off course. I'm best to stay with them because they will correct, unless they're just terrible, but they will correct. And you're actually best behind them versus saying, hey, I'm going to go by myself, because now you're going to use all this energy that you didn't need to be using. Okay. We have 3 more minutes. And so the next thing I'm going to just talk about is the buoys. So a tip for going around a buoy. This is what we've been doing in training in Austin. We've been practicing having your comfortable race pace stroke rate. And all of a sudden in the middle of the pool, turning your stroke rate up. You need to be able to have the skill, because around the buoy, it gets chaotic to where all of a sudden you're like, you know, stroke rate is up, heart rate goes up, because you're just trying to get around it. And so if you do not practice that in training, your heart rate's going to go up and you don't know how to recover from it. Also, you need to have the skill of just being able to turn it on like that. And so that's my number one thing, is practice it in training. And then from the high stroke rate, go back into smooth, bring your heart rate down. Okay. But there's 2 ways to do it. If you're aggressive and you don't mind being in there, you shoot straight for the buoy, you turn around, be prepared to grab some shoulders, just saying what it is, and just cut straight in, because some people just don't know how to swim around a buoy. So you just got to kind of be aggressive with that at that moment. Or you could be the person that's just going to, I'm going to take a wider line. I don't want to hit anyone. I want my space. And you need to go into the buoy with that plan. Otherwise you're going to get pummeled. Okay, cool. Drafting on the swim, we kind of touched on that a second. For me, you got to see what's more beneficial for you. Some people say, being right on the hip is a good drafting position. I always got thrown off being right on the hip. Like I could not do that. I always was best right on the feet. And learning again the skill to swim right on the feet without impeding them is huge. You should not be touching the feet of the person in front of you. And so when I swam and drafted off someone, I always dove my hands in a little bit deeper. And so now my strokes changed completely, because I knew if I touch their feet, well, guess what? I'm slowing them down. I don't want to slow them down. I don't want to piss them off. They're helping me. So I would like dive down and just kind of swim randomly and then just give them enough space. And typically I'd be like this far behind them. And so I just play with it. And if I felt they pulled away a little bit, I surged, even if it meant that I was going to suffer for the next 2 minutes, I would accelerate. And again, reason to pick up your cadence and know how to accelerate. I would accelerate, get back on the feet, knowing it's going to save me for the next, 20 minutes. So again, prepare for that. Okay. It's 6:29. Does any of the coaches want to add to any kind of swim tip? Nick, Katie, Harold? No. Okay.
I'll add 2 quick items. So the first is, one of the things that's beautiful with what Ironman has done for all their 70.3 and fulls is that we now have the same swim start for virtually every race. So it's 6 people at a time, 6 across every 6 seconds. You can figure out if the race turns to the left or turns to the right, to the point you made about where you want to seat yourself. If you want all your space and it turns to the left, go in the right slot. Doesn't matter whether you go in the 110 or the 115, you're going to be able to get enough space out there to kind of relax. And the second thing is, one of the tips that I found has been pretty helpful for athletes to really make sure they don't go too hard at the beginning is to count their first 100 strokes. So kind of count your first 100 strokes. That usually takes you between the 100 and 200 meter buoy and gives you something to focus on rather than getting into the water, catching up to this person, doing that. And then once you kind of get to 100, then you kind of settle into race pace. And then you can start to see, okay, to Harold's point, where are people around me? Who do I want to get into a pack with? Am I on the right line? How do I go about this? How do I want to make that turn? Where am I at compared to the kayaks? All that stuff. But just kind of use that first 100 strokes to kind of settle in, and you'll find that just like starting the bike easier or starting the run easier, it'll usually yield a much better result for most people.
Perfect. Thanks, Coach.
Yeah, I have a little something to add on to that. So this is kind of a way that I try to convey that same message, is that when you show up, you know, to a race and you've tapered well and your effort on race day, you're going to put out your highest performance that you can possibly put out. Typically, like if you're gauging your effort in like a 1 to 10 type of basis, and your 10 out of 10 is a really hard effort, on that race day, especially at the beginning, it's going to feel like an 8, right? So if you want to go 8 out of 10, then make it feel like a 6. Okay, that's kind of a good way to kind of think about it. All right. And then also, if you are one of those swimmers who likes to swim your own race, you want to be by yourself, do your thing, then you need to be in really good contact with how often you're going to sight, because you're navigating by yourself. You don't have anybody else to follow. And so the best thing for you is to swim the shortest distance around the course. You don't want to be swimming all over the place. So we do that by sighting more often. But if we sight more often, that does disrupt our stroke a little bit. So each individual athlete who's kind of in that category needs to find that rhythm of what's best for you in terms of how often you want to sight to hold your line and navigate the course well.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah, what's wild is you see the lead swimmers sighting frequently. Like if you had to watch Lucy Charles, she's sighting like almost all the time, but it doesn't disrupt her stroke. She doesn't slow down at all. So that's why she can do that. And she's usually in the front. So, but anyway, it's something you need to practice for sure in training. So that's perfect. We did have just, there was one thing we're going to talk about next week, which was a great question on running power. And then Tim, just as far as the bubbles, yeah, as long as I saw bubbles, like I'm looking ahead and I see any bubbles, I know I'm close enough. Like I want my hands in the bubbles. And so again, that's just practice in the pool. Like we'll have you guys setting off maybe a little sooner behind each other, kind of practicing what that seems like. And then if you're swimming with a pack, how often do you need a side? Okay, Desiree, we just talked about that, Desiree. So that's perfect. Just depends. So, okay. Thanks, you guys. Have a great week. And we'll see you next Sunday. Appreciate everyone.